Honey. Honey is a sweet and viscous substance made by several species of bees, the best known of which are honeybees. 1. 2. Honey is made and stored to nourish bee colonies. Bees produce honey by gathering and then refining the sugary secretions of plants, primarily floral nectar, or the secretions of other insects, like the honeydew of aphids. This refinement takes place both within individual bees, through regurgitation and enzymatic activity, and during storage in the hive, through water evaporation that concentrates the honey's sugars until it is thick and viscous. A jar of honey with a honey dipper and an American biscuit. Honeybees stockpile honey in the hive. Within the hive is a structure made from wax called honeycomb. The honeycomb is made up of hundreds or thousands of hexagonal cells, into which the bees regurgitate honey for storage. Other honey-producing species of bee store the substance in different structures, such as the pots made of wax and resin used by the stingless bee. 1. 2. 3. Honey for human consumption is collected from wild bee colonies, or from the hives of domesticated bees. The honey produced by honeybees is the most familiar to humans, thanks to its worldwide commercial production and availability. 4. The husbandry of bees is known as beekeeping or apiculture, with the cultivation of stingless bees usually referred to as meliponiculture. Honey is sweet because of its high concentrations of the monosaccharides fructose and glucose. It has about the same relative sweetness as sucrose, table sugar. 5. 6. 1 standard tablespoon, 15 milliliters, of honey provides around 190 kilojoules, 46 kilocalories, of food energy. 7. It has attractive chemical properties for baking and a distinctive flavor when used as a sweetener. 5. Most microorganisms cannot grow in honey, and sealed honey therefore does not spoil. Samples of honey discovered in archaeological contexts have proven edible even after millennia. 8. 9. French honey from different floral sources, with visible differences in color and texture. Honey use and production has a long and varied history, with its beginnings in prehistoric times. Several cave paintings in Cuevas de la Araña in Spain depict humans foraging for honey at least 8,000 years ago. 10. 11. While Apis mellifera is an Old World insect, large-scale meliponiculture of New World stingless bees has been practiced by Mayans since pre-Columbian times. 2. 12. Formation. A honeybee with its proboscis extended into a calyx of goldenrod. Honeycomb displaying hexagonal prismatic wax cells in which honeybees store honey. By honeybees. Honey is produced by bees who have collected nectar or honeydew. Bees value honey for its sugars, which they consume to support general metabolic activity, especially that of their flight muscles during foraging, and as a food for their larvae. To this end, bees stockpile honey to provide for themselves during ordinary foraging as well as during lean periods, as in overwintering. 13. 14. During foraging, bees use part of the nectar they collect to power their flight muscles. The majority of nectar collected is not used to directly nourish the insects but is instead destined for regurgitation, enzymatic digestion, and finally long-term storage as honey. 13. 15. During cold weather or when other food sources are scarce, adult and larval bees consume stored honey, which is many times as energy-dense as the nectar from which it is made. 14. After leaving the hive, a foraging bee collects sugar-rich nectar or honeydew. Nectar from the flower generally has a water content of 70 to 80% and is much less viscous than finished honey, which usually has a water content around 18%. 16. 17. The water content of honeydew from aphids and other true bugs is generally very close to the sap on which those insects feed and is usually somewhat more dilute than nectar. One source describes the water content of honeydew as around 89%. 18. Whether it is feeding on nectar or honeydew, the bee sucks these runny fluids through its proboscis, which delivers the liquid to the bee's honey stomach or honey crop. 15. This cavity lies just above its food stomach, the latter of which digests pollen and sugars consumed by an individual honeybee for its own nourishment. In Apis mellifera, the honey stomach holds about 40 milligrams of liquid. This is about half the weight of an unladen bee. Collecting this quantity in nectar can require visits to more than 1,000 flowers. When nectar is plentiful, it can take a bee more than an hour of ceaseless work to collect enough nectar to fill its honey crop. Salivary enzymes and proteins from the bee's hypopharyngeal gland are secreted into the nectar once it is in the bee's honey stomach. These substances begin cleaving complex sugars like sucrose and starches into simpler sugars such as glucose and fructose. This process slightly raises the water content and the acidity of the partially digested nectar. 13. 19. Once filled, the forager bees return to the hive. There they regurgitate and transfer nectar to hive bees. Once it is in their own honey stomachs, the hive bees regurgitate the nectar, repeatedly forming bubbles between their mandibles, speeding its digestion and concentration. These bubbles create a large surface area per volume, and by this means the bees evaporate a portion of the nectar's water into the warm air of the hive. 13. 15. 20. Hive bees form honey processing groups. These groups work in relay, with one bee subjecting the processed nectar to bubbling and then passing the refined liquid on to others. It can take as long as 20 minutes of continuous regurgitation, digestion and evaporation until the product reaches storage quality. 15. The new honey is then placed in honeycomb cells, which are left uncapped. This honey still has a very high water content, up to 70%, depending on the concentration of nectar gathered. At this stage of its refinement, the water content of the honey is high enough that ubiquitous yeast spores can reproduce in it, a process which, if left unchecked, would rapidly consume the new honey's sugars. 21. To combat this, bees use an ability rare among insects, the endogenous generation of heat. Bees are among the few insects that can create large amounts of body heat. They use this ability to produce a constant ambient temperature in their hives. Hive temperatures are usually around 35 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, in the honey storage areas. This temperature is regulated either by generating heat with their bodies or removing it through water evaporation. The evaporation removes water from the stored honey, drawing heat from the colony. The bees use their wings to govern hive cooling. Coordinated wing beating moves air across the wet honey, drawing out water and heat. Ventilation of the hive eventually expels both excess water and heat into the outside world. The process of evaporating continues until the honey reaches its final water content of between 15.5% to 18%. 16. This concentrates the sugars far beyond the saturation point of water, which is to say there is far more sugar dissolved in what little water remains in honey than ever could be dissolved in an equivalent volume of water. Honey, even at hive temperatures, is therefore a supercooled solution of various sugars in water. These concentrations of sugar can only be achieved near room temperature by evaporation of a less concentrated solution, in this case nectar. For osmotic reasons, such high concentrations of sugar are extremely unfavorable to microbiological reproduction and all fermentation is consequently halted. 14. 15. The bees then cap the cells of finished honey with wax. This seals them from contamination and prevents further evaporation. 15. So long as its water concentration does not rise much above 18%, honey has an indefinite shelf life, both within the hive and after its removal by a beekeeper. 14. By other insects. Honeybees are not the only eusocial insects to produce honey. All non-parasitic bumblebees and stingless bees produce honey. Some wasp species, such as Brachygastra lecaguana and Brachygastra mellifica, found in South and Central America, are known to feed on nectar and produce honey. 22. Other wasps, such as Polistes versicolor, also consume honey. In the middle of their life cycles they alternate between feeding on protein-rich pollen and feeding on honey, which is a far denser source of food energy. 23. Human intervention. Human beings have semi-domesticated several species of honeybee by taking advantage of their swarming stage. Swarming is the means by which new colonies are established when there is no longer space for expansion in the colony's present hive. The old queen lays eggs that will develop into new queens and then leads as many as half the colony to a site for a new hive. Bees generally swarm before a suitable location for another hive has been discovered by scouts sent out for this purpose. Until such a location is found, the swarm will simply conglomerate near the former hive, often from tree branches. These swarms are unusually docile and amenable to transport by humans. When provided with a suitable nesting site, such as a commercial Langstroth hive, the swarm will readily form a new colony in artificial surroundings. These semi-domesticated colonies are then looked after by humans practicing apiculture or meliponiculture. Captured bees are encouraged to forage, often in agricultural settings such as orchards, where pollinators are highly valued. The honey, pollen, wax and resins the bees produce are all harvested by humans for a variety of uses. 24. The term, semi-domesticated, is preferred because all bee colonies, even those in very large agricultural apiculture operations, readily leave the protection of humans in swarms that can establish successful wild colonies. Much of the effort in commercial beekeeping is dedicated to persuading a hive that is ready to swarm to produce more honeycomb in its present location. This is usually done by adding more space to the colony with honey supers. The term, semi-domesticated, is preferred because all bee colonies, even those in very large agricultural apiculture operations, readily leave the protection of humans in swarms that can establish successful wild colonies. Much of the effort in commercial beekeeping is dedicated to persuading a hive that is ready to swarm to produce more honeycomb in its present location. This is usually done by adding more space to the colony with honey supers, empty boxes placed on top of an existing colony. The bees can then usually be enticed to develop this empty space instead of dividing their colony through swarming. 25. Production. Collection. Sealed frame of honey. Extraction from a honeycomb. Filtering from a honeycomb. Honey is collected from wild bee colonies or from domesticated beehives. On average, a hive will produce about 29 kilograms, 65 pounds, of honey per year. 26 wild bee nests are sometimes located by following a honey guide bird. To safely collect honey from a hive, beekeepers typically pacify the bees using a bee smoker. The smoke triggers a feeding instinct, an attempt to save the resources of the hive from a possible fire, making them less aggressive, and obscures the pheromones the bees use to communicate. The honeycomb is removed from the hive and the honey may be extracted from it either by crushing or by using a honey extractor. The honey is then usually filtered to remove beeswax and other debris. Before the invention of removable frames, bee colonies were often sacrificed to conduct the harvest. The harvester would take all the available honey and replace the entire colony the next spring. Since the invention of removable frames, the principles of husbandry led most beekeepers to ensure that their bees have enough stores to survive the winter, either by leaving some honey in the beehive or by providing the colony with a honey substitute such as sugar water or crystalline sugar, often in the form of a candy board. The amount of food necessary to survive the winter depends on the variety of bees and on the length and severity of local winters. Many animal species are attracted to wild or domestic sources of honey. 27. Preservation. Because of its composition and chemical properties, honey is suitable for long-term storage, and is easily assimilated even after long preservation. Honey, and objects immersed in honey, have been preserved for centuries. 28-29. However, no edible honey has been found in Egyptian tombs. All such cases have been proven to be other substances or only chemical traces. 30. The key to preservation is limiting access to humidity. In its cured state, honey has a sufficiently high sugar content to inhibit fermentation. If exposed to moist air, its hydrophilic properties pull moisture into the honey, eventually diluting it to the point that fermentation can begin. 31. The long shelf life of honey is attributed to an enzyme found in the stomach of bees. The bees mix glucose oxidase with expelled nectar they previously consumed, creating two byproducts, gluconic acid and hydrogen peroxide, which are partially responsible for honey acidity and suppression of bacterial growth. 8. Adulteration. Honey is sometimes adulterated by the addition of other sugars, syrups, or compounds to change its flavor or viscosity, reduce cost, or increase the fructose content to inhibit crystallization. Honey has been adulterated since ancient times, when honey was sometimes blended with plant syrups such as maple, birch, or sorghum and sold to customers as pure honey. Sometimes crystallized honey was mixed with flour or other fillers, hiding the adulteration from buyers until the honey was. Production of natural honey in 2020. Country. Production. Tons. China 458,100. Turkey 104,077. Iran 79,955. Argentina 74,403. Ukraine 68,028. United States 66,948. World 1,770,119. Source: FAOSTAT 35. Liquefied. In modern times, the most common adulterant became clear, almost flavorless corn syrup. The adulterated mixture can be very difficult to distinguish from pure honey. 32. According to the Codex Alimentarius of the United Nations, any product labeled as honey or pure honey must be a wholly natural product, although labeling laws differ between countries. 33. In the United States, according to the National Honey Board, ensuring honey authenticity is one of the great challenges facing the honey industry today. Over the past half-century, a number of honey testing methods have been developed to detect food fraud. To date, there is no single universal analytical method available which is capable of detecting all types of adulteration with adequate sensitivity. 34. Isotope ratio mass spectrometry can be used to detect addition of corn syrup and cane sugar by the carbon isotopic signature. Addition of sugars originating from corn or sugar cane C4 plants, unlike the plants used by bees, and also sugar beet, which are predominantly C3 plants, skews the isotopic ratio of sugars present in honey, 34, but does not influence the isotopic ratio of proteins. In an unadulterated honey, the carbon isotopic ratios of sugars and proteins should match. Levels as low as 7% of addition can be detected. 34. Worldwide production. In 2020, global production of honey was 1.8 million tons, led by China with 26% of the world total. Table. 35 other major producers were Turkey, Iran, Argentina, and Ukraine. 35. Food. Over its history as a food, 10. The main uses of honey are in cooking, baking, desserts, as a spread on bread, as an addition to various beverages such as tea, and as a sweetener in some commercial beverages. 36. Due to its energy density, honey is an important food for virtually all hunter-gatherer cultures in warm climates, with the Hadza people ranking honey as their favorite food. 37. Honey hunters in Africa have a mutualistic relationship with certain species of honey-guide birds. 38. Modern uses. Fermentation. Possibly the world's oldest fermented beverage, dating from 9,000 years ago. 39. Mead, honey wine, is the alcoholic product made by adding yeast to honey water must and fermenting it for weeks or months. 40. 41. The yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae is commonly used in modern mead production. 40. 41. Mead varieties include drinks called metheglin, with spices or herbs, melomel, with fruit juices, such as grape, specifically called piment hypocras, with cinnamon, and sack mead, high concentration of honey. 41. Many of which have been developed as commercial products numbering in the hundreds in the United States. 42. Honey is also used to make mead beer, called braggot. 43. Physical and chemical properties. Crystallized honey. The inset shows a close-up of the honey, showing the individual glucose grains in the fructose mixture. The physical properties of honey vary, depending on water content, the type of flora used to produce it, pasturage temperature, and the proportion of the specific sugars it contains. Fresh honey is a supersaturated liquid, containing more sugar than the water can typically dissolve at ambient temperatures. At room temperature, honey is a supercooled liquid, in which the glucose precipitates into solid granules. This forms a semisolid solution of precipitated glucose crystals in a solution of fructose and other ingredients. The density of honey typically ranges between 1.38 and 1.45 kilograms per liter at 20 degrees Celsius. 44. Phase transitions. The melting point of crystallized honey is between 40 and 50 degrees Celsius, 104 and 122 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on its composition. Below this temperature, honey can be either in a metastable state, meaning that it will not crystallize until a seed crystal is added, or, more often, it is in a labile state, being saturated with enough sugars to crystallize spontaneously. 45. The rate of crystallization is affected by many factors, but the primary factor is the ratio of the main sugars, fructose to glucose. Honeys that are supersaturated with a very high percentage of glucose, such as brassica honey, crystallize almost immediately after harvesting, while honeys with a low percentage of glucose, such as chestnut or tupelo honey, do not crystallize. Some types of honey may produce few but very large crystals, while others produce many small crystals. 46. Crystallization is also affected by water content, because a high percentage of water inhibits crystallization, as does a high dextrin content. Temperature also affects the rate of crystallization, with the fastest growth occurring between 13 and 17 degrees Celsius, 55 and 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Crystal nuclei seeds tend to form more readily if the honey is disturbed, by stirring, shaking, or agitating, rather than if left at rest. However, the nucleation of microscopic seed crystals is greatest between 5 and 8 degrees Celsius, 41 and 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Therefore, larger but fewer crystals tend to form at higher temperatures, while smaller but more numerous crystals usually form at lower temperatures. Below 5 degrees Celsius, the honey will not crystallize, thus the original texture and flavor can be preserved indefinitely. 46. Honey is a supercooled liquid when stored below its melting point, as is normal. At very low temperatures, honey does not freeze solid, rather its viscosity increases. Like most viscous liquids, the honey becomes thick and sluggish with decreasing temperature. At minus 20 degrees Celsius, minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit, honey may appear or even feel solid, but it continues to flow at very low rates. Honey has a glass transition between minus 42 and minus 51 degrees Celsius, minus 44 and minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Below this temperature, honey enters a glassy state and becomes an amorphous solid non-crystalline. 47-48. Rheology. Pouring raw honey. The sheet-like appearance of the flow is the result of high viscosity and low surface tension, contributing to the stickiness of honey. 49-50. The viscosity of honey is affected greatly by both temperature and water content. The higher the water percentage, the more easily honey flows. Above its melting point, however, water has little effect on viscosity. Aside from water content, the composition of most types of honey also has little effect on viscosity. At 25 degrees Celsius, 77 degrees Fahrenheit, honey with 14% water content generally has a viscosity around 400 poise, while a honey containing 20% water has a viscosity around 20 poise. Viscosity increases very slowly with moderate cooling. A honey containing 16% water, at 70 degrees Celsius, 158 degrees Fahrenheit, has a viscosity around 2 poise, while at 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degrees Fahrenheit, the viscosity is around 70 poise. With further cooling, the increase in viscosity is more rapid, reaching 600 poise at around 14 degrees Celsius, 57 degrees Fahrenheit. 51-52. However, while honey is viscous, it has low surface tension of 50 to 60 millijoule per square meter, making its wettability similar to water, glycerin, or most other liquids. 53. The high viscosity and wettability of honey cause stickiness, which is a time-dependent process in supercooled liquids between the glass transition temperature (Tg) and the crystalline melting temperature. 54. Most types of honey are Newtonian liquids, but a few types have non-Newtonian viscous properties. Honeys from heather or manuka display thixotropic properties. These types of honey enter a gel-like state when motionless, but liquefy when stirred. 55. Electrical and optical properties. Because honey contains electrolytes, in the form of acids and minerals, it exhibits varying degrees of electrical conductivity. Measurements of the electrical conductivity are used to determine the quality of honey in terms of ash content. 52. The effect honey has on light is useful for determining the type and quality. Variations in its water content alter its refractive index. Water content can easily be measured with a refractometer. Typically, the refractive index for honey ranges from 1.504 at 13% water content to 1.474 at 25%. Honey also has an effect on polarized light, in that it rotates the polarization plane. The fructose gives a negative rotation, while the glucose gives a positive one. The overall rotation can be used to measure the ratio of the mixture. 52-31. Honey is generally pale yellow and dark brown in color, but other colors can occur, depending on the sugar source. 56. Bee colonies that forage on kudzu, Poraria montana var. Labata flowers, for example, produce honey that varies in color from red to purple. 57. Hygroscopy and fermentation. Honey has the ability to absorb moisture directly from the air, a phenomenon called hygroscopy. The amount of water the honey absorbs is dependent on the relative humidity of the air. Because honey contains yeast, this hygroscopic nature requires that honey be stored in sealed containers to prevent fermentation, which usually begins if the honey's water content rises much above 25%. Honey tends to absorb more water in this manner than the individual sugars allow on their own, which may be due to other ingredients it contains. 31. Fermentation of honey usually occurs after crystallization, because without the glucose, the liquid portion of the honey primarily consists of a concentrated mixture of fructose, acids, and water, providing the yeast with enough of an increase in the water percentage for growth. Honey that is to be stored at room temperature for long periods of time is often pasteurized, to kill any yeast, by heating it above 70 degrees Celsius, 158 degrees Fahrenheit. 31. Thermal characteristics. Creamed honey. The honey on the left is fresh, and the honey on the right has been aged at room temperature for 2 years. The Maillard reaction produces considerable differences in the color and flavor of the aged honey, which remains edible. Like all sugar compounds, honey caramelizes if heated sufficiently, becoming darker in color, and eventually burns. However, honey contains fructose, which caramelizes at lower temperatures than glucose. 58. The temperature at which caramelization begins varies, depending on the composition, but is typically between 70 and 110 degrees Celsius, 158 and 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Honey also contains acids, which act as catalysts for caramelization. The specific types of acids and their amounts play a primary role in determining the exact temperature. 59. Of these acids, the amino acids, which occur in very small amounts, play an important role in the darkening of honey. The amino acids form darkened compounds called melanoidins, during a Maillard reaction. The Maillard reaction occurs slowly at room temperature, taking from a few to several months to show visible darkening, but speeds up dramatically with increasing temperatures. However, the reaction can also be slowed by storing the honey at colder temperatures. 60. Unlike many other liquids, honey has very poor thermal conductivity of 0.5 Wm.K, at 13% water content compared to 401 Wm.K, of copper taking a long time to reach thermal equilibrium. 61. Due to its high kinematic viscosity, honey does not transfer heat through momentum diffusion, convection, but rather through thermal diffusion, more like a solid, so melting crystallized honey can easily result in localized caramelization if the heat source is too hot or not evenly distributed. However, honey takes substantially longer to liquefy when just above the melting point than at elevated temperatures. 52. Melting 20 kilograms, 44 pounds, of crystallized honey at 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, can take up to 24 hours, while 50 kilograms, 110 lb, may take twice as long. These times can be cut nearly in half by heating at 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit. However, many of the minor substances in honey can be affected greatly by heating, changing the flavor, aroma, or other properties, so heating is usually done at the lowest temperature and for the shortest time possible. 62. Acid content and flavor effects. The average pH of honey is 3.9, but can range from 3.4 to 6.1. 63. Honey contains many kinds of acids, both organic and amino. However, the different types and their amounts vary considerably, depending on the type of honey. These acids may be aromatic or aliphatic, non-aromatic. The aliphatic acids contribute greatly to the flavor of honey by interacting with the flavors of other ingredients. 63. Organic acids comprise most of the acids in honey, accounting for 0.171.17% of the mixture, with gluconic acid formed by the actions of glucose oxidase as the most prevalent. 63. Minor amounts of other organic acids are present, consisting of formic, acetic, butyric, citric, lactic, malic, pyroglutamic, propionic, valeric, capronic, palmitic, and succinic, among many others. 63. 64. Volatile organic compounds. Individual honeys from different plant sources contain over 100 volatile organic compounds, VOCs, which play a primary role in determining honey flavors and aromas. 65, 66, 67. VOCs are carbon-based compounds that readily vaporize into the air, providing aroma, including the scents of flowers, essential oils, or ripening fruit. 65, 67. The typical chemical families of VOCs found in honey include hydrocarbons, aldehydes, alcohols, ketones, esters, acids, benzenes, furans, pyrans, norisoprenoids, and terpenes, among many others and their derivatives. 65, 67. The specific VOCs and their amounts vary considerably between different types of honey obtained by bees foraging on different plant sources. 65, 66, 67. By example, when comparing the mixture of VOCs in different honeys in one review, Longan honey had a higher amount of volatiles, 48 VOCs, while sunflower honey had the lowest number of volatiles, 8 VOCs. 65. VOCs are primarily introduced into the honey from the nectar, where they are excreted by the flowers imparting individual scents. 65. The specific types and concentrations of certain VOCs can be used to determine the type of flora used to produce monofloral honeys. 65, 67. The specific geography, soil composition and acidity used to grow the flora also have an effect on honey aroma properties. 66. Such as a fruity, or grassy, aroma from Longan honey, or a waxy, aroma from sunflower honey. 65. Dominant VOCs in one study were linalool oxide, trans-linalool oxide, 2-phenylacetaldehyd, benzyl ethanol, isophorone, and methyl nonanoate. 65. VOCs can also be introduced from the bodies of the bees, be produced by the enzymatic actions of digestion, or from chemical reactions that occur between different substances within the honey during storage, and therefore may change, increase, or decrease over long periods of time. 65, 66. VOCs may be produced, altered, or greatly affected by temperature and processing. 66. Some VOCs are heat labile, and are destroyed at elevated temperatures, while others can be created during non-enzymatic reactions, such as the Maillard reaction. 67. VOCs are responsible for nearly all of the aroma produced by a honey, which may be described as sweet, flowery, citrus, almond, or rancid, among other terms. 65. In addition, VOCs play a large role in determining the specific flavor of the honey, both through the aromas and flavor. 65. VOCs from honeys in different geographic regions can be used as floral markers of those regions, and as markers of the bees that forage the nectars. 65, 66. Classification. Honey is classified by its source, floral or not, and divisions are made according to the packaging and processing used. Regional honeys are also identified. In the U.S., honey is also graded on its color and optical density by USDA standards, graded on the Fund scale, which ranges from 0.4, water white, honey to more than 114.4, dark amber, honey. 68. Plant source. Generally, honey is classified by the floral source of the nectar from which it was made. Honeys can be from specific types of flower nectars or can be blended after collection. The pollen in honey is traceable to floral source and therefore region of origin. The rheological and melisopollinological properties of honey can be used to identify the major plant nectar source used in its production. 69. Monofloral. Monofloral honey is made primarily from the nectar of one type of flower. Monofloral honeys have distinctive flavors and colors because of differences between their principal nectar sources. 70. To produce monofloral honey, beekeepers keep beehives in an area where the bees have access, as far as possible, to only one type of flower. In practice, a small proportion of any monofloral honey will be from other flower types. Typical examples of North American monofloral honeys are clover, orange blossom, sage, tupelo, buckwheat, fireweed, mesquite, sourwood, 71 cherry, and blueberry. Some typical European examples include thyme, thistle, heather, acacia, dandelion, sunflower, lavender, honeysuckle, and varieties from lime and chestnut trees. In North Africa, e.g. Egypt, examples include clover, cotton, and citrus, mainly orange blossoms. The unique flora of Australia yields a number of distinctive honeys, with some of the most popular being yellow box, blue gum, ironbark, bush mallee, Tasmanian leatherwood, and macadamia. Polyfloral. Polyfloral honey, also known as wildflower honey, 72, is derived from the nectar of many types of flowers. 73. The taste may vary from year to year, and the aroma and the flavor can be more or less intense, depending on which flowers are blooming. 70. Honeydew honey. Honeydew honey is made from bees taking direct secretions from trees such Honeydew honey is made from bees taking direct secretions from trees such as pine, fir, chestnut, and oak, or primarily honeydew, the sweet secretions of aphids or other plant sap-sucking insects, to produce honey rather than from nectar. 75. This honey has a much larger proportion of indigestibles than light floral honeys, thus causing dysentery to the bees. 76. Honeydew honey has a stronger and less sweet flavor than nectar-based honey, and European countries have been the primary market for honeydew honey. 74. In Greece, pine honey, a type of honeydew honey, constitutes 60–65% of honey production. 77. Classification by packaging and processing. A variety of honey flavors and container sizes and styles from the 2008 Texas State Fair. Generally, honey is bottled in its familiar liquid form, but it is sold in other forms, and can be subjected to a variety of processing methods. Crystallized honey occurs when some of the glucose content has spontaneously crystallized from solution as the monohydrate. It is also called granulated honey, or candied honey. Honey that has crystallized, or is commercially purchased crystallized, can be returned to a liquid state by warming. 78. Despite a common misconception, honey crystallizing does not mean it has expired. 79. 80. Pasteurized honey has been heated in a pasteurization process which requires temperatures of 72 degrees Celsius, 161 degrees Fahrenheit, or higher. Pasteurization destroys yeast cells. It also liquefies any microcrystals in the honey, which delays the onset of visible crystallization. However, excessive heat exposure also results in product deterioration, as it increases the level of hydroxymethylfurfuryl (HMF) and reduces enzyme, e.g. diastase, activity. Heat also darkens the honey, and affects taste and fragrance. 81. Raw honey as it exists in the beehive or is obtained by extraction, settling, or straining, without adding heat, although some honey that has been minimally processed is often labeled as raw honey. 82. Raw honey contains some pollen and may contain small particles of wax. Strained honey has been passed through a mesh material to remove particulate material, 83 pieces of wax, propolis, other defects without removing pollen, minerals, or enzymes. Filtered honey of any type has been filtered to the extent that all or most of the fine particles, pollen grains, air bubbles, or other materials normally found in suspension, have been removed. 84. The process typically heats honey to 66–77 degrees Celsius, 150–170 degrees Fahrenheit, to more easily pass through the filter. 85. Filtered honey is very clear and will not crystallize as quickly, 85 making it preferred by supermarkets. 86. The most common method involves the addition of diatomaceous earth to honey that is heated to 60 degrees Celsius, 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and passed through filter paper or canvas until a filter cake of diatomaceous earth builds up on the filter. 71. Ultrasonicated honey has been processed by ultrasonication, a non-thermal processing alternative for honey. When honey is exposed to ultrasonication, most of the yeast cells are destroyed. Those cells that survive sonication generally lose their ability to grow, which reduces the rate of honey fermentation substantially. Ultrasonication also eliminates existing crystals and inhibits further crystallization in honey. Ultrasonically aided liquefaction can work at substantially lower temperatures around 35 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and can reduce liquefaction time to less than 30 seconds. 87. Creamed honey, also called whipped honey, spun honey, churned honey, honey fondant, and, in the UK, set honey, has been processed to control crystallization. Creamed honey contains a large number of small crystals, which prevent the formation of larger crystals that can occur in unprocessed honey. The processing also produces a honey with a smooth, spreadable consistency. 88. Dried honey has the moisture extracted from liquid honey to 87. Creamed honey, also called whipped honey, spun honey, churned honey, honey fondant, and 87. Creamed honey, also called whipped honey, spun honey, churned honey, honey fondant, and, in the UK, set honey, has been processed to control crystallization. Creamed honey contains a large number of small crystals, which prevent the formation of larger crystals that can occur in unprocessed honey. The processing also produces a honey with a smooth, spreadable consistency. 88. Dried honey has the moisture extracted from liquid honey to create completely solid, non-sticky granules. This process may or may not include the use of drying and anticaking agents. 89. Dried honey is used in baked goods. 89. And to garnish desserts. 90. Comb honey is still in the honey bee's wax comb. It is traditionally collected using standard wooden frames in honey supers. The frames are collected and the comb is cut out in chunks before packaging. As an alternative to this labor-intensive method, plastic rings or cartridges can be used that do not require manual cutting of the comb, and speed packaging. Comb honey harvested in the traditional manner is also referred to as cut comb honey. 78. 13. 91. Chunk honey is packed in wide-mouthed containers. It consists of one or more pieces of comb honey immersed in extracted liquid honey. 7813. Honey decoctions are made from honey or honey byproducts which have been dissolved in water, then reduced, usually by means of boiling. Other ingredients may then be added. For example, Abamel has added citrus. The resulting product may be similar to molasses. Baker's honey is outside the normal specification for honey, due to a foreign taste or odor, or because it has begun to ferment or has been overheated. It is generally used as an ingredient in food processing. Additional requirements exist for labeling Baker's honey, including that it may not be sold labeled simply as honey. 92. Grading. Countries have differing standards for grading honey. In the U.S., honey grading is performed voluntarily based upon USDA standards. USDA offers inspection and grading, as online, in-plant, or lot inspection, upon application, on a fee-for-service basis. Honey is graded based upon a number of factors, including water content, flavor and aroma, absence of defects, and clarity. Honey is also classified by color, though it is not a factor in the grading scale. 93. The USDA honey grade scale is: Grade. Soluble solids flavor and aroma, absence of defects, clarity. A is greater than or equal to 81.4%. Good. Has a good, normal flavor and aroma for the predominant floral source or, when blended, a good flavor for the blend of floral sources, and the honey is free from caramelized flavor or objectionable flavor caused by fermentation, smoke, chemicals, or other causes with the exception of the predominant floral source. Practically free, contains practically no defects that affect the appearance or edibility of the product. Clear, may contain air bubbles which do not materially affect the appearance of the product and may contain a trace of pollen grains or other finely divided particles of suspended material which do not affect the appearance of the product. B is greater than or equal to 81.4%. Reasonably good, has a reasonably good, normal flavor and aroma for the predominant floral source or, when blended, a reasonably good flavor for the blend of floral sources, and the honey is practically free from caramelized flavor and is free from objectionable flavor caused by fermentation, smoke, chemicals, or other causes with the exception of the predominant floral source. Reasonably free, may contain defects which do not materially affect the appearance or edibility of the product. Reasonably clear, may contain air bubbles, pollen grains, or other finely divided particles of suspended material which do not materially affect the appearance of the product. C is greater than or equal to 80.0%. Fairly good, has a fairly good, normal flavor and aroma for the predominant floral source or, when blended, a fairly good flavor for the blend of floral sources, and the honey is reasonably free from caramelized flavor and is free from objectionable flavor caused by fermentation, smoke, chemicals, or other causes with the exception of the predominant floral source. Fairly free, may contain defects which do not seriously affect the appearance or edibility of the product. Fairly clear, may contain air bubbles, pollen grains, or other finely divided particles of suspended material which do not seriously affect the appearance of the product. Substandard. Fails grade C. Fails grade C. Fails grade C. Fails grade C. India certifies honey grades based on additional factors, such as the FIAS test, and other empirical measurements. 94. Indicators of quality. High-quality honey can be distinguished by fragrance, taste, and consistency. Ripe, freshly collected, high-quality honey at 20 degrees Celsius, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, should flow from a knife in a straight stream, without breaking into separate drops. 95. After falling down, the honey should form a bead. The honey, when poured, should form small, temporary layers that disappear. 95. Ripe, freshly collected, high-quality honey at 20 degrees Celsius, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, should flow from a knife in a straight stream, without breaking into separate drops. 95. After falling down, the honey should form a bead. The honey, when poured, should form small, temporary layers that disappear fairly quickly, indicating high viscosity. If not, it indicates honey with excessive water content of over 20%. 95. Not suitable for long-term preservation. 96. In jars, fresh honey should appear as a pure, consistent fluid, and should not set in layers. Within a few weeks to a few months of extraction, many varieties of honey crystallize into a cream-colored solid. Some varieties of honey, including tupelo, acacia, and sage, crystallize less regularly. Honey may be heated during bottling at temperatures of 40 to 49 degrees C, 104-120 degrees Fahrenheit, to delay or inhibit crystallization. Overheating is indicated by change in enzyme levels, for instance, diastase activity, which can be determined with the shade or the Fidebus methods. A fluffy film on the surface of the honey, like a white foam, or marble-colored or white-spotted crystallization on a container's sides, is formed by air bubbles trapped during the bottling process. A 2008 Italian study determined that nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy can be used to distinguish between different honey types, and can be used to pinpoint the area where it was produced. Researchers were able to identify differences in acacia and polyfloral honeys by the differing proportions of fructose and sucrose, as well as differing levels of aromatic amino acids phenylalanine and tyrosine. This ability allows greater ease of selecting compatible stocks. 97. Nutrition. 100 grams of honey provides about 1,270 kilojoules, 304 kilocalories, of energy with no significant amounts of essential nutrients. 7. Composed of 17% water and 82% carbohydrates, honey has low content of fat, dietary fiber, and protein. Sugar profile. A mixture of sugars and other carbohydrates. Honey is mainly fructose, about 38%, and glucose, about 32%, 5, with remaining sugars including maltose, sucrose, and other complex carbohydrates. 5. Its glycemic index ranges from 31 to 78, depending on the variety. 100. The specific composition, color, aroma, and flavor of any batch of honey depend on the flowers foraged by bees that produce the honey. 10. One 1980 study found that mixed floral honey from several United States regions typically contains the following. 101. Fructose, 38.2%. Glucose, 31.3%. Maltose, 7.1%. Sucrose, 1.3%. Water, 17.2%. Higher sugars, 1.5%. Ash, 0.2%. Other, undetermined, 3.2%. This means that 55% of the combined fructose and glucose content was fructose and 45% was glucose, which enables comparison with the essentially identical result, average of 56% and 44% in the study described below. A 2013 NMR spectroscopy study of 20 different honeys from Germany found that their sugar contents comprised fructose, 28% to 41%, glucose, 22% to 35%. The average ratio was 56% fructose to 44% glucose, but the ratios in the individual honeys ranged from a high of 64% fructose and 36% glucose, one type of flower honey, table 3 in reference, to a low of 50% fructose and 50% glucose, a different floral source. This NMR method was not able to quantify maltose, galactose, and the other minor sugars as compared to fructose and glucose. 102. Medical use and research. Wounds and burns. Honey is a folk treatment for burns and other skin injuries. Preliminary evidence suggests that it aids in the healing of partial thickness burns 4 to 5 days faster than other dressings, and moderate evidence suggests that post-operative infections treated with honey heal faster and with fewer adverse events than with antiseptic and gauze. 103. The evidence for the use of honey in various other wound treatments is of low quality, and firm conclusions cannot be drawn. 103. 104. Evidence does not support the use of honey-based products for the treatment of venous stasis ulcers or ingrown toenail. 105. 106. Several medical-grade honey products have been approved by the FDA for use in treating minor wounds and burns. 107. Antibiotic. Honey has long been used as a topical antibiotic by practitioners of traditional and herbal medicine. 108. 109. Honey's 108. 109. Honey's antibacterial effects were first demonstrated by the Dutch scientist Bernardus Adrianus van Kettel in 1892. 110. 111. Since then, numerous studies have shown that honey has broad-spectrum antibacterial activity against gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, although potency varies widely between different honeys. 107. 111. 112. 113. Due to the proliferation of antibiotic-resistant bacteria in the last few decades, there has been renewed interest in researching the antibacterial properties of honey. 109. Components of honey under preliminary research for potential antibiotic use include methylglyoxal, hydrogen peroxide, and royalizin, also called defensin 1. 114. 115. Cough. For chronic and acute coughs, a Cochrane review found no strong evidence for or against the use of honey. 116. 117. For treating children, the systematic review concluded with moderate to low evidence that honey helps more than no treatment, diphenhydramine, and placebo at giving relief from coughing. 117. Honey does not appear to work better than dextromethorphan at relieving coughing in children. 117. Other reviews have also supported the use of honey for treating children. 118. 119. The UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency recommends avoiding giving over-the-counter cough and common cold medication to children under 6, and suggests a homemade remedy containing honey and lemon is likely to be just as useful and safer to take, but warns that honey should not be given to babies because of the risk of infant botulism. 120. The World Health Organization recommends honey as a treatment for coughs and sore throats, including for children, stating that no reason exists to believe it is less effective than a commercial remedy. 121. Other. The use of honey has been recommended as a temporary intervention for known or suspected button cell battery ingestions to reduce the risk and severity of injury to the esophagus caused by the battery prior to its removal. 122, 123, 124. There is no evidence that honey is beneficial for treating cancer. 125. Although honey may be useful for controlling side effects of radiation therapy or chemotherapy used to treat cancer. 126. Consumption is sometimes advocated as a treatment for seasonal allergies due to pollen, but scientific evidence to support the claim is inconclusive. 125. Honey is generally considered ineffective for the treatment of allergic conjunctivitis. 125. 127. The majority of calories in honey are from fructose. When consumed in addition to a normal diet, fructose causes significant weight gain, but when fructose was substituted for other carbohydrates of equal energy value, there was no effect on body weight. 128. Honey has a mild laxative effect which has been noted as being helpful in alleviating constipation and bloating. 129. Health hazards. Honey is generally safe when taken in typical food amounts, 118, 125, but it may have various, potential adverse effects or interactions in combination with excessive consumption, existing disease conditions, or drugs. 125. Included among these are mild reactions to high intake, such as anxiety, insomnia, or hyperactivity in about 10% of children, according to one study. 118. No symptoms of anxiety, insomnia, or hyperactivity were detected with honey consumption compared to placebo, according to another study. 118. 118. No symptoms of anxiety, insomnia, or hyperactivity were detected with honey consumption compared to placebo, according to another study. 118. Honey consumption may interact adversely with existing allergies, high blood sugar levels, as in diabetes, or anticoagulants used to control bleeding, among other clinical conditions. 125. People who have a weakened immune system may be at risk of bacterial or fungal infection from eating honey. 130. Botulism. Infants can develop botulism after consuming honey contaminated with Clostridium botulinum endospores. 131. Infantile botulism shows geographical variation. In the UK, only 6 cases were reported between 1976 and 2006, 132, yet the US has much higher rates, 1.9 per 100,000 live births, 47.2% of which are in California. 133. While the risk honey poses to infant health is small, taking the risk is not recommended until after 1 year of age, and then giving honey is considered safe. 134. Toxic honey. Mad honey intoxication is a result of eating honey containing grayonotoxins. 135. Honey produced from flowers of rhododendrons, mountain laurels, sheep laurel, and azaleas may cause honey intoxication. Symptoms include dizziness, weakness, excessive perspiration, nausea, and vomiting. Less commonly, low blood pressure, shock, heart rhythm irregularities, and convulsions may occur, with rare cases resulting in death. According to the FDA, honey intoxication is more likely when using natural, unprocessed honey from farmers who may have a small number of hives because commercial processing, which pulls of honey from numerous sources, dilutes the toxins. 136. Toxic honey may also result when bees are proximate to tutu bushes, Coriaria arborea, and the vine hopper insect Scolopapa australis. Both are found throughout New Zealand. Bees gather honeydew produced by the vine hopper insects feeding on the tutu plant. This introduces the poison tutin into honey. 137. Only a few areas in New Zealand, the Coromandel Peninsula, Eastern Bay of Plenty region and the Marlborough Sounds, frequently produce toxic honey. Symptoms of tutin poisoning include vomiting, delirium, giddiness, increased excitability, stupor, coma, and violent convulsions. 138. To reduce the risk of tutin poisoning, humans should not eat honey taken from feral hives in the risk areas of New Zealand. Since December 2001, New Zealand beekeepers have been required to reduce the risk of producing toxic honey by closely monitoring tutu, vine hopper, and foraging conditions within 3 kilometers 2 miles of their apiary. Intoxication is rarely dangerous. 135. Folk medicine. In myths and folk medicine, honey was used both orally and topically to treat various ailments including gastric disturbances, ulcers, skin wounds, and skin burns by ancient Greeks and Egyptians, and in Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine. 139. History. Honey seeker depicted in an 8,000-year-old cave painting at Coves de l'Aranya, Bicorp in Valencia. Honey collection is an ancient activity, 11 long preceding the honeybee's domestication. This traditional practice is known as honey hunting. A Mesolithic rock painting in a cave in Valencia, Spain, dating back at least 8,000 years, depicts 2 honey foragers collecting honey and honeycomb from a wild bee's nest. The figures are depicted carrying baskets or gourds, and using a ladder or series of ropes to reach the nest. 11. Humans follow the greater honey guide bird to wild beehives. 140. This behavior may have evolved with early hominids. 141. 142. The oldest known honey remains were found in Georgia during the construction of the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. Archaeologists found honey remains on the inner surface of clay vessels unearthed in an ancient tomb, dating back between 4,700 and 5,500 years. 143. 144. 145. In ancient Georgia, several types of honey were buried with a person for journeys into the afterlife, including linden, berry, and meadowflower varieties. 146. The first written records of beekeeping are from ancient Egypt, where honey was used to sweeten cakes, biscuits, and other foods and as a base for unguents in Egyptian hieroglyphs. The dead were often buried in or with honey in Egypt, Mesopotamia and other regions. Bees were kept at temples to produce honey for temple offerings, mummification and other uses. 147. In ancient Greece, honey was produced from the Archaic to the Hellenistic periods. In 594 BCE, 148 beekeeping around Athens was so widespread that Solon passed a law about it. He who sets up hives of bees must put them 300 feet 90 meters away from those already installed by another. 149. 4 Greek archaeological excavations of pottery located ancient hives. 150. According to Columella, Greek beekeepers of the Hellenistic period did not hesitate to move their hives over rather long distances to maximize production, taking advantage of the different vegetative cycles in different regions. 150. The spiritual and supposed therapeutic use of honey in ancient India was documented in both the Vedas and the Ayurveda texts. 139. Religious significance. In ancient Greek religion, the food of Zeus and the 12 gods of Olympus was honey in the form of nectar and ambrosia. 151. In the Hebrew Bible, the promised land Canaan, the land of Israel, is described 16 times as the land of milk and honey, 152 as a metaphor for its bounty. Of the 55 times the word honey appears in the Hebrew Bible, 16 are part of the expression the land of milk and honey, and only twice as honey, explicitly associated with bees, both being related to wild bees. 152. Modern biblical researchers long considered that the original Hebrew word used in the Bible, davash, refers to the sweet syrup produced from figs or dates, because the domestication of the honeybee was completely undocumented through archaeology anywhere in the ancient Near East, excluding Egypt, at the time associated with the earlier biblical narratives, 152 books of Exodus, Judges, Kings, etc. In 2005, however, an apiary dating from the 10th century BC was found in Telephone Rehov, Israel that contained 100 hives, estimated to produce half a ton of honey annually. 153. 152. This was, as of 2007, the only such finding made by archaeologists in the entire ancient Near East region, and it opens the possibility that biblical honey was indeed bee honey. 152. In Judaism, honey symbolizes the sweetness of the new year, Rosh Hashanah, and is traditionally eaten with apple slices. In Jewish tradition, honey is a symbol for the new year, Rosh Hashanah. At the traditional meal for that holiday, apple slices are dipped in honey and eaten to bring a sweet new year. Some Rosh Hashanah greetings show honey and an apple, symbolizing the feast. In some congregations, small straws of honey are given out to usher in the new year. 154. Pure honey is considered kosher. Food portal. Permitted to be eaten by religious Jews, though it is produced by a flying insect, a non-kosher creature, eating other products of non-kosher animals is forbidden. 155. It belongs among the PARV neutral foods, containing neither meat nor dairy products and allowed to be eaten together with either. Early Christians used honey as a symbol of spiritual perfection in christening ceremonies. 147. In Islam, an entire chapter, surah, in the Quran is called an-Nahl, the bees. According to his teachings, hadith, Muhammad strongly recommended honey for healing purposes. The Quran promotes honey as a nutritious and healthy food, saying, "And thy Lord taught the bee to build its cells in hills, on trees, and in men's habitations, then to eat of all the produce of the earth, and find with skill the spacious paths of its Lord. There issues from within their bodies a drink of varying colors, wherein is healing for men. Verily in this is a sign for those who give thought." 156. 157. In Hinduism, honey, madhu, is one of the 5 elixirs of life panchamrita. In temples, honey is poured over the deities in a ritual called madhu abhisheka. The Vedas and other ancient literature mention the use of honey as a great medicinal and health food. 158. In Buddhism, honey plays an important role in the festival of Madhu Purnima, celebrated in India and Bangladesh. The day commemorates Buddha's making peace among his disciples by retreating into the wilderness. According to legend, while he was there, a monkey brought him honey to eat. On Madhu Purnima, Buddhists remember this act by giving honey to monks. The monkey's gift is frequently depicted in Buddhist art. 158. Honey is especially associated with Winnie the Pooh and Bamse's thunder honey. Beekeeping. Beekeeping, or apiculture, is the maintenance of bee colonies, commonly in artificial beehives. Honey bees in the genus Apis are the most commonly kept species, but other honey-producing bees such as Melipona stingless bees are also kept. Beekeepers, or apiarists, keep bees to collect honey and other products of the hive: beeswax, propolis, bee pollen, and royal jelly. Other sources of beekeeping income include pollination of crops, raising queens, and production of package bees for sale. Beehives are kept in an apiary or bee yard. The keeping of bees by humans, primarily for honey production, began around 10,000 years ago. A sample of 5,500-year-old honey was unearthed from the grave of a noblewoman during an archaeological excavations in 2003 near the town of Borjomi, Georgia. 1. Ceramic jars found in the grave contain several types of honey, including linden and flower honey. Domestication of bees can be seen in Egyptian art, too, from around 4,500 years ago. There is also evidence of beekeeping in ancient China, Greece, and Maya. In the modern era, beekeeping is often used for crop pollination and the collection of its byproducts, such as wax and propolis. The largest beekeeping operations are agricultural businesses, but many small beekeeping operations are run as a hobby. As beekeeping technology has advanced, beekeeping has become more accessible, and urban beekeeping was described as a growing trend as of 2016. 3. Some studies have found city-kept bees are healthier than those in rural settings because there are fewer pesticides and greater biodiversity in cities. 4. History. History. Honey seeker depicted on 8,000-year-old cave painting near Valencia, Spain. 5. Beekeeping, Tacuanum sanitatus casanatensis, 14th century. Early history. At least 10,000 years ago, humans began to attempt to maintain colonies of wild bees in artificial hives made from hollow logs, wooden boxes, pottery vessels, and woven straw baskets known as skeps. Depictions of humans collecting honey from wild bees date to 10,000 years ago. 6. Beekeeping in pottery vessels began about 9,000 years ago in North Africa. 7. Traces of beeswax have been found in potsherds throughout the Middle East beginning about 7000 BCE. 7. Domestication of bees is shown in Egyptian art from around 4,500 years ago. 8. Simple hives and smoke were used, and honey was stored in jars, some of which were found in the tombs of pharaohs such as Tutankhamun. In the 18th century, European understanding of the colonies and biology of bees allowed the construction of the movable comb hive so honey could be harvested without destroying the entire colony. Honeybees were kept in Egypt from antiquity. 9. On the walls of the Sun Temple of Niuser-Ini from the 5th dynasty before 2422 BCE, workers are depicted blowing smoke into hives as they remove honeycombs. 10. Inscriptions detailing the production of honey are found on the tomb of Pabasa from the 26th dynasty circa 650 BCE, in which cylindrical hives are depicted along with people pouring honey into jars. 11. An inscription records the introduction of honeybees into the land of Suhem in Mesopotamia, where they were previously unknown. I am Shamash Resh Ujer, the governor of Suhu in the land of Mari. Bees that collect honey, which none of my ancestors had ever seen or brought into the land of Suhu, I brought down from the mountain of the men of Hava, and made them settle in the orchards of the town Gabari built it. They collect honey and wax, and I know how to melt the honey and wax, and the gardeners know too. Whoever comes in the future, may he ask the old men of the town, who will say thus, they are the buildings of Shamash Resh Ujer, the governor of Suhu, who introduced honeybees into the land of Suhu. Translated text from Steele, Daly, 2002, 12. The oldest archaeological finds directly relating to beekeeping have been discovered at Rehav, a Bronze and Iron Age archaeological site in the Jordan Valley, Israel. 1330 intact hives made of straw and unbaked clay were discovered in the ruins of the city, dating from about 900 BCE, by archaeologist Amihai Mazar. The hives were found in orderly rows, 3 high, in a manner that according to Mazar could have accommodated around 100 hives, held more than 1 million bees and had a potential annual yield of 500 kilograms, 1,100 pounds, of honey and 70 kilograms, 150 pounds, of beeswax, and are evidence an advanced honey industry in Telephone Rehav, Israel 3,000 years ago. 14, 15, 16. The Beekeepers, 1568, by Peter Bruegel the Elder. In ancient Greece, in Crete and Mycenae, there existed a system of high-status apiculture that is evidenced by the finds of hives, smoking pots, honey extractors and other beekeeping paraphernalia in Knossos. Beekeeping was considered a highly valued industry controlled by beekeeping overseers, owners of gold rings depicting apiculture scenes rather than religious ones as they have been reinterpreted recently, contra Sir Arthur Evans. 17 aspects of the lives of bees and beekeeping are discussed at length by Aristotle. Beekeeping was also documented by the Roman writers Virgil, Gaius Julius Hyginus, Varro, and Columella. 18. Beekeeping has been practiced in ancient China since antiquity. In a book written by Fan Li, or Dao Zugong, during the spring and autumn period are sections describing beekeeping, stressing the importance of the quality of the wooden box used and its effects on the quality of the honey. 19. The Chinese word for honey mi Chinese, mi, pinyin, mi, reconstructed Old Chinese pronunciation *mjit, was borrowed from Proto-Tocharian *mount, where *m is palatalized, cf. Tocharian bmit cognate with English mead. 20. The ancient Maya domesticated a species of stingless bee, which they used for several purposes, including making balshay, a mead-like alcoholic drink. 21. By 300 BCE they had achieved the highest levels of stingless beekeeping practices in the world. 22. The use of stingless bees is referred to as meliponiculture, which is named after bees of the tribe Meliponini such as Melipona quadrifasciata in Brazil. This variation of beekeeping still occurs today. 23. For instance, in Australia, the stingless bee Tetragonula carbonaria is kept for the production of honey. 24. Scientific study of honey bees. European natural philosophers began to scientifically study bee colonies in the 18th century. Eminent among these scientists were Swammerdam, René Antoine Furchot de Réaumur, Charles Bonnet and François Huber. Swammerdam and Réaumur were among the first to use a microscope and dissection to understand the internal biology of honey bees. Réaumur was among the first to construct a glass-walled observation hive to better observe activities inside hives. He observed queens laying eggs in open cells but did not know how queens were fertilized. The mating of a queen and drone had not yet been observed and many theories held queens were self-fertile, while others believed a vapor or miasma emanating from the drones fertilized queens without physical contact. Huber was the first to prove by observation and experiment that drones physically inseminate queens outside the confines of the hive, usually a great distance away. 25. Following Réaumur's design, Huber built improved glass-walled observation hives and sectional hives that could be opened like the leaves of a book. This allowed the inspection of individual wax combs and greatly improved direct observation of hive activity. Although he went blind before he was 20, Huber employed a secretary named François Bernins to make daily observations, conduct experiment and keep accurate notes for more than 20 years. Huber confirmed a hive consists of one queen, who is the mother of every female worker and male drone in the colony. He was also the first to confirm mating with drones takes place outside hives and that queens are inseminated in successive matings with male drones, which occur high in the air at a great distance from the hive. Together, Huber and Bernins dissected bees under the microscope, and were among the first to describe the ovaries and spermatheca, sperm store, of queens, as well as the penis of male drones. Huber is regarded as the father of modern bee science, and his work Nouvelles Observations sur les abeilles, New Observations on Bees, 26 revealed all of the basic scientific facts of the biology and ecology of honeybees. 25. Hive designs. Before the invention of the movable comb hive, the harvesting of honey frequently resulted in the destruction of the whole colony. The wild hive was broken into using smoke to quieten the bees. The honeycombs were pulled out and either immediately eaten whole or crushed, along with the eggs, larvae, and honey they held. A sieve or basket was used to separate the liquid honey from the demolished brood nest. In medieval times in northern Europe, although skeps and other containers were made to house bees, the honey and wax were still extracted after the bee colony was killed. 27. This was usually accomplished by using burning sulfur to suffocate the colony without harming the honey within. It was impossible to replace old, dark brown brood comb in which larval bees are constricted by layers of shed pupil skins. 28. The movable frames of modern hives are considered to have been developed from the traditional basket top bar, movable comb, hives of grease, which allowed the beekeeper to avoid killing the bees. 29. The oldest evidence of their use dates to 1669, although it is probable their use is more than 3,000 years old. 30. A beekeeper inspecting a hive frame from a Langstroth hive. Intermediate stages in the transition from older methods of beekeeping were recorded in 1768 by Thomas Wildman, who described advances over the destructive, skep-based method so bees no longer had to be killed to harvest their honey. 31. Wildman fixed an array of parallel wooden bars across the top of a straw hive 10 inches 25 centimeters in diameter, so that there are in all 7 bars of deal to which the bees fix their combs, foreshadowing future uses of movable comb hives. He also described using such hives in a multi-story configuration, foreshadowing the modern use of supers. He added successive straw hives below and later removed the ones above when free of brood and filled with honey so the bees could be separately preserved at the harvest the following season. Wildman also described the use of hives with sliding frames, in which the bees would build their comb. 32. Wildman's book acknowledges the advances in knowledge of bees made by Swammerdam, Maraldi, and de Réaumur. He includes a lengthy translation of Réaumur's account of the natural history of bees. Wildman also describes the initiatives of others in designing hives for the preservation of bees when taking the harvest, citing reports from Brittany in the 1750s due to the Comte de la Bourdonnais. Another hive design was invented by Rev. John Thorley in 1744. The hive was placed in a bell jar that was screwed onto a wicker basket. The bees were free to move from the basket to the jar, and honey was produced and stored in the jar. The hive was designed to keep the bees from swarming as much as they would have in other hive designs. 33. In the 19th century, changes in beekeeping practice were completed through the development of the movable comb hive by the American Lorenzo Lorraine Langstroth, who was the first person to make practical use of Huber's earlier discovery of a specific spatial distance between the wax combs, later called the bee space, which bees do not block with wax but keep as a free passage. Having determined this bee space, which is commonly given as between 6 and 9 mm, 0.24 and 0.35 in, 34-35 though up to 15 mm, 0.59 in, has been found in populations in Ethiopia. 36. Langstroth then designed a series of wooden frames within a rectangular hive box, carefully maintaining the correct space between successive frames. He found the bees would build parallel honeycombs in the box without bonding them to each other or to the hive walls. This enables the beekeeper to slide any frame out of the hive for inspection without harming the bees or the comb, and protecting the eggs, larvae and pupae in the cells. It also meant combs containing honey could be gently removed and the honey extracted without destroying the comb. The emptied honeycombs could then be returned intact to the bees for refilling. Langstroth's book The Hive and Honeybee 1853 describes his rediscovery of the bee space and the development of his patent movable comb hive. The invention and development of the movable comb hive enabled the growth of large-scale, commercial honey production in both Europe and the U.S. 20th and 21st century hive designs. Langstroth's design of movable comb hives was adopted by apiarists and inventors in both North America and Europe, and a wide range of movable comb hives were developed in England, France, Germany and the United States. 37. Classic designs evolved in each country. Dadant hives and Langstroth hives are still dominant in the U.S. In France the de Lanstroth hive became popular. In the UK a British national hive became standard by the 1930s, although in Scotland the smaller Smith hive is still popular. In some Scandinavian countries and in Russia, the traditional trough hive persisted until late in the 20th century and is still kept in some areas. The Langstroth and Dadant designs, however, remain ubiquitous in the US and in many parts of Europe, though Sweden, Denmark, Germany, France and Italy all have their own national hive designs. Regional variations of hive were developed according to climate, floral productivity and reproductive characteristics of the subspecies of native honeybees in each bioregion. 37. Honey-laden honeycomb in a wooden frame. The differences in hive dimensions are insignificant in comparison to the common factors in these hives. They are all square or rectangular, they all use movable wooden frames, and they all consist of a floor, brood box, honey super, crown board and roof. Hives have traditionally been constructed from cedar, pine or cypress wood but in recent years, hives made from injection molded, dense polystyrene have become increasingly common. 38. Hives also use queen excluders between the brood box and honey supers to keep the queen from laying eggs in cells next to those containing honey intended for consumption. With the 20th century advent of mite pests, hive floors are often replaced, either temporarily or permanently, with a wire mesh and a removable tray. 38. Western honeybee on a honeycomb. In 2015, the flow hive system was invented in Australia by Cedar Anderson and his father Stuart Anderson, 39, whose design allows honey to be extracted without cumbersome centrifuge equipment. Pioneers of practical and commercial beekeeping. In the 19th century, improvements were made in the design and production of beehives, systems of management and husbandry, stock improvement by selective breeding, honey extraction and marketing. Notable innovators of modern beekeeping include Prokopovich's beehive system. Petro Prokopovich used frames with channels in the side of the woodwork. These were packed side by side in stacked boxes. Bees traveled between frames and boxes via these channels, 40 which were similar to the cutouts in the sides of modern wooden sections. 41. Jan Giersen, beehive design has influenced modern beehives.